Welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. We are live. Please do not swear. I am Dan Morgan. I am joined this week by Kristian Walsh and Joel Rabinowitz. Gentlemen, I hope you're well. Plenty to discuss in Liverpool life at the minute. A lot more good news over the past week than bad. And by God, we've had some bad over recent weeks. But today we're going to do something different. It's the end of the year, or sort of. It's coming towards the end of the year. And so we're going to look at 2020 in terms of Liverpool and the Premier League and awards around the Premier League. And to do that, Chris, you've been running a Player of the Year competition on Reach Sport across all networks. And you have done this, which is still running, I believe, over the next week or so.
Yeah, it finishes on Wednesday at midnight. So basically, Wednesday's your final chance.
Okay, so give the listeners, watchers, an overview of how it's gone and what you've been doing.
Yeah, so the reason we did it, I suppose, is ultimately, 2020 is a year that none of us will really ever forget. But not just because of what's been happening off the pitch, but also, on it. Liverpool became Premier League champions for the first time in 30 years. And it's been a bit of a wild year anyway, away from Liverpool as well. So we decided to sort of combine, I suppose, the two biggest sort of cornerstones of football coverage in this country, and that's sort of our local brands, as in Liverpool Echo, Manchester Evening News, Newcastle Chronicle, Football London, Liverpool.com, everyone across our network. And then also, of course, the most important part of all, and that's the fans. So our journalists across all of the network, they basically fired across their nominations. We made a 7-man shortlist, of which there are 4 Liverpool players on there. And now it's basically open to an open vote for everybody to get voting and pick the winner of the inaugural Fans Footballer of the Year. There's also, I'm not sure if there are any people watching this who aren't Liverpool fans, but if you are not a Liverpool fan, you can vote for your Player of the Year for any other club. So you can vote for your Fulham, your Everton, your Chelsea, your Crystal Palace. Of course, Liverpool's also there, and there's a 4-man shortlist for that as well, which was chosen by Echo correspondent Paul Gorst. But ultimately, the same 4 players that Gorsty chose are the same 4 that our network chose for the overall award. So those 4 are Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk, Jordan Henderson, and Sadio Mane. And the other 3 in the overall award is Marcus Rashford, Kevin De Bruyne, and Jack Grealish.
Yeah, we're going to discuss those now in different forms. So obviously, you know the format, and please get over and vote any which way you can. Like Chris says, it's got until midnight on Wednesday. The 7-man shortlist, Joel. I think firstly, it's interesting to sort of discuss how we vote, how we judge a player's importance to a club in general. I think whenever we do this, it's almost certainly a club at the top. And now and again, you'll get a success story from a club at the bottom of someone who's sort of dragged someone away from relegation or whatever. But that tends to be a manager if there is one of those stories present. But there are the stories that you never get to see. And there are the sort of supporters who can tell you that, for instance, James Ward-Prowse's importance to Southampton is massive on a week-to-week basis. And I think it's important to sort of remember those players, isn't it, as well as sort of the headline grabbers in all of this.
Yeah, I think someone like Grealish being on there is interesting because I don't think anyone can make a reasonable argument to say he's been better than Salah or Mane or De Bruyne over the calendar year per se. But given kind of what he's achieved within the context of Aston Villa, who at one point, quite late on really after Project Restart, looked pretty destined to go down, wouldn't have stayed up without him. And then the level he's gone on to this season, I was completely expecting him to be snapped up by one of the big clubs in the summer. Amazed someone like Man United didn't really go in for him with a big offer when the Sancho thing didn't happen. And yeah, for him to sign that new deal there and kick on like he has, I think he's been easily one of the players of the season so far. We obviously saw it against Liverpool. He was unbelievable that day. His game has come on so much this year. So it's nice to see someone like that included. The other thing that stood out to me when I first saw that list, I was a little bit surprised seeing Rashford there as the United player over Fernandes. Just because of the impact he's had since coming in January. Fernandes, for me, would have been the obvious kind of United player. I suppose with Rashford, was a lot more beyond the pitch, like you say, in terms of his all-round influence and how he makes supporters feel, which feeds into that. He's obviously a brilliant player as well. But yeah, if it was a name that I was kind of surprised that wasn't on there as well, outside of was Son as well. I think particularly this season has been, Spurs' standout player along with Kane, obviously. But I think the difficult thing with all of this, I'm sure we'll come on to, is the entire year is difficult to assess how good players have been, because you've got that kind of weird pre-COVID period. Then there's the project restart period, and then you've got this season so far. So there's almost like 3 segments to try and compare and bring together.
It's a really good point, Chris, isn't it? I mean, it's hard enough in general just splitting something like this over 2 seasons, for example, or the back half of one season and the first half of another. A classic case for that might be Aubameyang. Someone who finishes one season excellently and then just disappears off the face of the earth the next one. But I think Joel's right with Son. He was one that surprised me too in terms of players who aren't on there.
Absolutely, it's difficult. I think when we put the vote out to our network of journalists and writers initially to get this shortlist, we all had to pick, 5 nominees, from first to fifth, and I think both of you gents did it as well. It was hard because I think, as you say, we sort of said to everybody, look, you could define footballer however you want to define footballer. It can be who's the most important to their team, and that's where, for example, Grealish got one of my votes, because I genuinely think without Grealish, Aston Villa go down without a shadow of a doubt. But again, it's maybe a little bit different this season. He's absolutely fantastic, but Villa have got a really good team around him now, in the sense of Barkley. I know he's injured at the moment. Watkins looks really good. They've got a really strong defence up until a couple of weeks ago. Rashford, again, I don't think anyone would ever have him necessarily as the top 5 footballers on ability over the past 12 months, but what he's done off the pitch is more than worthwhile recognition, which is why he made my top 5 as well. And as you say, with sort of somebody like Son, I think the thing with someone like Son is that he's so under the radar good. I think it's really hard to distinguish what would necessarily make him better than one of these 7, either off the pitch or on the pitch. I think it's also an interesting point that you've raised there in terms of, it's hard with 2 seasons, but basically we're sort of dealing with 3 at the moment. We're dealing with that January to March when it was normal, and then we're dealing with the project restart, and now we're dealing with this season, which, to be honest, it's a bit of a weird season as well, because of the lack of pre-season preparation, because of any real sort of lead-in time, the short turnaround, and the fact that now games are coming thick and fast. It's really hard to assess. I mean, if I was to ask one of you guys now who's in the running for player of the season for 2020, 2021, I think we probably all come up with different answers, because it's such a wild season, where one week Harry Kane looks like he's become Lionel Messi incarnate, whereas the next week it's Mo Salah again. So I think it's a really difficult year to judge, and I think this is why it was a really interesting year to begin doing this, because somebody like Son, for example, has probably been as solid as anyone over the course of those 3 segments of the year, if you will. It's just that, has he got that up until maybe the past couple of months? Has he really got that defining feature, that defining moment, that defining attribute to his game? It looks like he started to bring goals to his game. He's obviously second top scorer at the moment with 10 goals. But was it enough to sort of turn people's heads? He was quite high up in the voting. We'll sort of reveal the top 15 when the results come out on Monday, the 21st of December. But Son was one of the top 10, so he was in with a shout of getting to the shortlist. Would have been interesting to see if he was on the vote, because obviously recency bias kicks in, and I think at the moment he's probably the best player in the Premier League. But it's really interesting because Kane's there. Does Son, do they split the vote a little bit? And I think that will probably happen. It's really interesting looking at the Tottenham specific votes, because without giving too much away, it's pretty tight between those 2 at the moment, because you either appreciate what Son does and you think he's really important, or you look at Harry Kane and think, well, he's the main man, he's central, the way he's readapting is really important. So it's fascinating how people, define, best footballers.
Yeah, not like Harry Kane to claim something that isn't his. Joe, in terms of who has surprised you this year, I mean, that's another open-ended question. I mean, are the players on there or is the players not on there who is in general over the calendar year disappointed you? Are the players who, it's another hard one again, isn't it? You can sort of quantify this with a player who's had a move, i.e. Diogo Jota, now looks on a different level to what he did as a Wolves player at the back half of sort of 1920. So yeah, I think it's a real sort of reminder that a calendar year is starkly different. I mean, one that just springs to my mind, and I never sort of fail to be surprised by him in a sort of physically staggering sense, is Vardy. Like, I just don't know how he maintains the levels that he does, and he never gets injured. Like, we talk about sports science a lot with Liverpool, but he's fit, he's sharp, he's ruthlessly sort of efficient in the box, and he just looks like he's not stopping. A player like that, for me, to go another year at the age he has, at the level he has, I think he's a modern day phenomenon in many senses.
Yeah, every single season, I always think it's going to be the one where Vardy drops off and he loses his pace and stops scoring at the rate he does. And I know his numbers have been a bit inflated by penalties this season. I think he's got 4 or 5 of his goals in the league have been from the spot. So that papers over it a little bit. But yeah, you're right in terms of his kind of just relentlessness and his continuity is staggering. In terms of ones who surprised me, one who I found massively underwhelming, I suppose not just this calendar year, but the whole of last season and so far this season, is Bernardo Silva. I'm not quite sure what the kind of reasoning is behind it, but I just remember I obviously watched pretty much all of the City games over the last couple of seasons because they've been so kind of tight with Liverpool. And yeah, I remember just him in 18-19 with De Bruyne out for so much of that season. For me, he was City's kind of defining force for a lot of that season, really. He was the one who was dragging them over the line in games when they weren't playing well. Him and Sterling together, really. I would have had Bernardo right up there alongside Van Dijk in the Player of the Year conversation. And it just feels like since last season, especially this calendar year, he's just gone completely off the radar. It's not like he's not playing. I mean, he's not starting quite as much as he used to, but when he is on the pitch, he just looks so much less effective, which has been a strange one. In terms of the other direction, in terms of players who've pleasantly surprised me, one is Zuma, mostly so far this season, I think. He's another one. I was just having a look before we started here. Chelsea signed him in this January. It'll be 7 years since he joined Chelsea. He's obviously had the loan spells at Stoke and Everton in that time, and at one point just looked like he was never really going to cut it at that level. And I think if you were going to draw up a Premier League team of the season so far, I think he'd be probably nailed on as one of the centre-backs. He scored 4 goals in 10 games, but Chelsea have had the best defence of the league so far this season. Most clean sheets, I think they've conceded a few as goals, and he's been pretty much an ever-present in all of that. So, yeah, he's been one who's sort of emerged really in the second half of this year.
Chris, how about you?
I think Bruno's up there, isn't he? I don't think you can take it away. I know there's a bit of a trope around him that he only scores penalties, but he doesn't. He's a much more rounded player. He reminds me a little bit, albeit a different kind of age category, of what Coutinho was for Liverpool. I'd be worried. It's weird. I'd be worried for them. I mean, I'm not worried about them. Obviously, they can do what they like. But when it comes to Fernandes, you just think, A, he's good enough that you become over reliant on him. But B, at the same time, there's probably a lot of good jigsaw pieces there which would not necessarily get used in the same way if Bruno's on the field. So it becomes this situation where you've got to play Bruno and you've got to play through Bruno because he's so good at what he does. But at the same time, are you marginalising the likes of Rashford, Greenwood? Martial's looked absolutely terrible this season by all accounts. We know that Pogba's obviously on his way out, but he's sort of taken that mantle from Pogba. Is it essentially a Bruno or nothing scenario? And Liverpool's didn't find themselves in that position necessarily with Coutinho, but it was a similar sort of vibe where it was the Fab Four for a fleeting 4 or 5 months, and I think Klopp basically realised that as good as Coutinho is, and probably that he was probably the most gifted individual player in terms of technique, flair, that kind of thing. That would obviously be open for debate, but even though he was Liverpool's best player, Liverpool will function better without him as a team. They sort of had their use out of him as this focal point of what they do going forward. I think United are in that stage at the moment whereby they have to play through Bruno. I think he's a fantastic footballer. Obviously a set piece specialist as well. Really important to them. Every time he's not been on the pitch, they just look completely devoid of inspiration and ideas. But at the same time, eventually there might become the tipping point where they're too reliant on him, or they're still playing through him when they've got a lot more to offer. So Bruno there at the moment, but sort of with a bit of a caveat. It's difficult, isn't it? As you say, Aubameyang would have been bang up there, I think, but he's been absolutely nowhere this season. I think Mikel Arteta's tactics don't really help him in that way. I think you're looking towards, to be honest, I mean, from a Liverpool perspective, I mean, we don't want to sort of dig out what Ghost he's nominated, and obviously what we all nominated as a network, but I think you can look at the likes of Fabinho. I think you can look at Trent. I think you can look at Andy Robertson, and you could say, well, ultimately, do they deserve to be in there? So I think there was interesting when we released the full results. I think it'll be quite interesting to see. There were certain players. I mean, Raheem Sterling got very few votes, really. What type of years he had, and because of the situation that we've all discussed of 2020 being what it's like, I couldn't tell you how Raheem Sterling's done this year. I know he's not really doing very well at the moment, but it feels so long ago now, the January and February of last year. And I think also from a Liverpool angle, I think we were so focused on what Liverpool were doing in January, February, March particularly. I think we were so obsessed with the idea of winning the league title, of potentially going unbeaten, but basically of what is going down as one of the greatest league seasons of our lifetimes in the club's history. I think we sort of, after a couple of years of obsession over what Man City were doing and obsession over what other teams were doing, kind of just enjoyed the moments of what Liverpool were doing. So it's I couldn't really tell you what Sterling or any of the City players were doing in January, February, March, because it was so long ago. And why were you bothering looking and detailing what City were doing in February when Liverpool are beating Manchester United 2-0 to go 25 points clear? So yeah, it's a really difficult one when you look at like City players and Chelsea players, because I think they've undergone a really strange year, to be honest.
No, I completely agree. And I think on Fernandes, I think he'll end up being a player whose own trajectory reflects Man United. And I mean that completely in the sense of the next manager. So he's got sort of an Ericsson Tottenham aura about him, that if they get the next manager right, he'll probably go up another level and he'll sort of reflect their rise, which will be inevitable. But if they don't, I think he'll stagnate massively. Just to move it on to Ghostie's choices, then Paul Ghost, the Liverpool Echo correspondent for the club. He has chosen Van Dijk, Salah, Henderson and Mane. And as Chris says, a lot of the journalists given the vote on this did also plump for those Liverpool players. I mean, Joel, it's some accolade considering who misses out. And again, it's probably a reminder of just how sort of good, in-depth, how full of leaders, how full of winners this Liverpool side is when you look at something like this and consider who could have been on there and who isn't. Yeah,
when I saw the four, I mean, this might be a controversial thing to say. I'd be interested in what you guys think. I think Van Dijk is a little bit lucky to be on that.
Yeah, same here.
Obviously, no reflection of him as a player. He's the best centre-back in the world. That's not in any doubt. I just think you look at this calendar year, he's obviously important in the first couple of months, January, February. But then Liverpool stop keeping clean sheets, start losing a few games, conceding regularly. He doesn't really have a great project restart. There's the Arsenal away game when he makes the mistake. There's a mistake in the opening game of this season against Leeds. Sounds like I'm digging him out here.
He genuinely plays in first gear in Project Restart.
Yeah, I just don't think we've quite seen the best of him. And obviously the injury thing at Everton is awful, and we don't know how he would have performed since then. So I think he was a little bit fortunate. I probably would have had one of the fullbacks in there. I think Robertson, actually, I would have had this calendar year. I think he's been absolutely outstanding. I actually would say he's been Liverpool's best player so far this season.
Yeah.
There's actually, it gets forgotten again because the games didn't mean that much, but I think he ended last season after Project Restart. I think he got like 5 or 6 assists in the last 6 games. He was basically contributing to a goal a game from left back. And he gets the goal, the brilliant header against Burnley in the game that they draw at Anfield. There's the goal against Arsenal this season. And I just think for consistency, the amount of time he spent on the pitch and just driving Liverpool forward constantly, he's a little bit unfortunate to not get in there. But there's other guys we've not even mentioned, Wijnaldum being one, I'm sure we'll come on to, but it's funny how the kind of perception has shifted around him since the summer, because I think a lot of us got so excited by the whole Thiago possibility in the summer that we kind of were guilty of overlooking just how important Wijnaldum was. And thank God he didn't go, because I don't know where Liverpool would be this season without him. He's played basically every game. I think he's actually taken his game up a level compared to where he was last season. He's really had to step up, and yeah, he's perennially a difficult player to define. I think he's one that most Liverpool fans, I don't think you could say he's underappreciated in the Liverpool bubble now, but certainly externally, I think people looking in who can't quite, they look at his goals and assist record, and he's probably not even that high on tackles or interceptions or anything. So there's not that much kind of stats-based evidence to back up why he is so good. But when you look at the results Liverpool put together and how many minutes he's on the pitch, and you actually focus on what he's doing in games, I think he's another one who you could quite easily put in that conversation as well.
I think the fact that there's no argument around Mane and Salah, Chris, just is another example of their levels. You know, we just debated for the best part of 20 minutes, Harry Kane, Son, Aubameyang, Rashford, and you can have genuine debates about them. But the fact that Mohamed Salah and Sadio Mane are included and in many ways a given is just a reminder of what Liverpool have got on their hands. Liverpool have two of five of the elite strikers in Europe on the hands still, and they have done for the last sort of 2.5 seasons.
Yeah, I took a couple of minutes out before recording this pod. I was watching BT Sports did a nice little montage of Mo Salah's 22 European goals for Liverpool, and it's just ridiculous. You just forget how many goals he scores, the volume of them, the type of them, the importance of them, the audacity of some of them. He didn't make my top 5 actually, and I think that's almost testament to how accepted his brilliance is now. But he almost has to be a level above what we assume is his level of brilliance to sort of register on my radar. You know, it's wild, because I think at the start of the season we did our predictions for Liverpool.com, and I think I shouted up, I think Mo Salah was going to have a 17-18 type of season again. Not sure he's quite there yet, and he's actually had a bit of a stop-start a couple of weeks because of the COVID test, etc. But you know, he certainly, you know, he's among the top scorers in the Premier League. He's averaging, I think, a goal involvement every single game. He's simply one of the best players in the world, and the fact that he didn't make my top 5 isn't a negative against him. I think it's just because I've just become so used to him being fantastic that if he's not above an 8, if he's not above an 8 out of 10, he's not really sort of registering. In terms of Mane, yeah, absolutely. And again, it's this type of thing where we go back to the year almost being in 3 parts, because I think if you look at Sadio Mane January to March, I think there's absolutely zero debate that he is the player of the year. I think he's both in terms of the award that the Premier League dish out, and in terms of our Football of the Year award that we're bringing in. So he does all right in Project Restart, and he's done all right this season. But overall, he's just absolutely a ludicrous footballer who, even when he's having a quiet game, even when he's having what we would class by his standards a poor game, he's still offering himself. He's still giving an outlet. He's still carrying the ball up the pitch. Him at 4 out of 10 is more important to Liverpool than a lot of players at 7 or 8 out of 10. And I think that's another mark of a really good player. With the greatest respect to somebody like Divock Origi or, you know, Taki Minamino, I feel like even if they are playing to their 7 or 8, their skill set and their ability is unmatched by Sadio Mane, who, even when he's miscontrolling balls or he's not quite getting into the game, he'll just pick up the ball in his own half once or twice, drive forward, play a 1-2 with Andy Robertson, and it just gets Liverpool up the pitch. It relieves pressure, creates a chance. It does something really positive. And I think that's the thing about Sadio Mane. Even when he's not playing very well, or certainly as well as he can do, he offers moments, and he's not necessarily somebody who'll grind for 90 minutes, but he'll do something at either end of the pitch that really helps Liverpool. So yeah, there are very few players like that in the world, and Sadio Mane is one of them. So yeah, both of them are really deserving in terms of their nominations, and yeah, I think it'll be quite a tight race, to be honest.
I fully agree with Joel, Chris, on Robertson. I think the difference as well between him and Trent is that you're now seeing a player in his peak, and I think hopefully, sort of how physically well he reacts to the conditioning set by this Liverpool team, by the sports science, that peak will last for quite a while. But for me, he's the best left back Liverpool have had in 30 years.
You can go further. I think you can go further.
Potentially, I think Steve Nicol is criminally underrated. So I think there's a genuine debate there. But I think sort of 100% post 1990, the best left back Liverpool have had.
Yeah, and it's always been a problem position for Liverpool, and the fact that they've solved it in the way that they've solved it is, I think he's one of the best left backs in the world, if not the best left back in the world. And there'll always be more fashionable shouts. There'll always be the next big thing coming through. But I genuinely feel, Andy Robertson is definitely up there. I think what the durability of him, I think what he's underrated for as well. I think we get into this. I think a lot of clubs do this. A lot of fans of a lot of clubs. You get sometimes too focused on the personality of a player in a good way, not just a bad way, but in a good way. So they become labelled as, and I've just done it there, somebody who gives it his all, 100%, goes into tackles. He's actually a really good footballer. He carries out what Jurgen Klopp needs from his left back to an absolute T. He's got a brilliant delivery on him. When he gets his head up, he can really pick out a pass. The way he goes past players sometimes on the turn is absolutely fantastic. He done it in a recent game, and he set up a goal. I think it was Brighton. So it's sort of the pre-assist, if you will, where he just glides past somebody, leaves them sprawled, pops it to Salah, pops it to Diogo Jota, and then it goes in. I think the peak is an interesting one because he's 26 now. He's 26. I think he's definitely got another 3 or 4 years at the top level that he's got, which is really exciting, and it augurs well for Trent. I think what we're seeing from Andy Robertson as well is a player who I think he knows the importance that he has in that team now, especially when Trent was out. I think he realised that it is really all down to me to create. If we're going to be doing this through our fullbacks, with the greatest respect to the world to Nico Williams, still a young player, still developing, still learning, still very safe on the ball. Ajax are home aside. So I think he realises, and I think he relishes that opportunity. I think he really enjoys the responsibility to sort of, try and get his fair share when he's on the pitch. But if it's all going through Andy Robertson, it's down to him. I think he really enjoys that. So yeah, I think he's really unfortunate. But again, I wouldn't say he's an unfashionable name. I think he's somebody that, Liverpool fans love. I think they adore, they respect him. But I do feel like his contribution, both defensively and attacking wise, probably goes under the radar. He clears that ball from under the bar against I can't quite remember which game it was. It might have been Brighton. And okay, I know he gives away the penalty. You can argue if it was a penalty or not, but he's really good at those last ditch tackles as well. Does one to Cristiano Ronaldo in Kiev in the final, which goes down. It will never be remembered because it's 3-1 and Liverpool lose the final. But that's the type of player that he is. Not only is he sort of 100% hard, but he's actually really intelligent to boot, and he's got a lot more in his locker.
Why I say peak is because I think it's a real moment in time thing. I think you've got a team that could not be suited better to Andy Robertson in terms of how he plays. And I think sort of in 4 years' time, when he is 30 and when Jurgen Klopp leaves Liverpool, I think that will be sort of that opportunity then gone. And I think he'll grasp the opportunity massively, and that will be his moment. But I think the peak Robertson years happen in a Klopp team is my point. I think you stick him in any other side in the league and you don't get half as much from him. But I think you're completely right. Some of the skills that we sometimes label as sort of modest working class, Scottish grit, if you like, are actually really into progression ball carries and, sort of transitions that Liverpool need and turnovers of play and stuff like that. He's consummate. He is. He really is. Joel, I want to ask you, 2021, before we sort of move it on, a little prediction of who comes to the fore. Firstly, in Liverpool colours, for next season. Give us a little prediction. Who are you thinking? Dijk, Upamecano, Erling Haaland when they sign this January? What's your thoughts?
I'm just going to say a continuation of Curtis Jones, really, who's been kind of one of the stories of the year. Of all the kind of consequences of Liverpool's injury crisis, which we all would have rather done without, I think he's been one of the real beneficiaries. We saw, obviously, his goal against Everton in the FA Cup right at the start of the year, which doesn't feel like it's this calendar year, but it was back in January. I think looking at the progression of him from then to now, he's a completely different kind of footballer now, much more tactically disciplined, knows his place within the system, and he's still obviously got that individual flair and a technique. He hasn't lost any of that, but he's learning to apply it in the way that Liverpool need him to play in that midfield role. I don't think he would have got all the game time. Well, he definitely wouldn't have got the game time if the likes of Thiago and Keita and stuff and Oxlade-Chamberlain hadn't been injured so much. But he's really stepped up, and he looks, Klopp said it himself recently, that he looks like he's been playing for us for about 10 years. And I think we forget, because he came into the Liverpool first team setup so early, he was in pre-season 2 or 3 years ago now. So we've known about him for a while, but he's still only 19, which is just ludicrous when you look at the level he's performing at and how complex that role is. We've seen much more experienced players struggle to do it, and he makes it look so natural. And just to think where he could be in a year's time. Not entirely sure, because there's a lot of competition, but I wouldn't write him off making a late shout for the England Euro squad if he keeps it up and keeps playing regularly at this level. So, he's my shout for next season. In terms of Premier League wide, to be honest, I haven't thought about it yet. I'd be interested to see what you guys have got.
I'd keep an eye on Ben Chilwell, to be honest. I think he's becoming really effective for Chelsea, and I think we know the importance of fullbacks in the modern game. I don't think this is any more a conversation around sort of attacking players who sort of get all the headlines and goals. I think he's, again, like Robertson, he's playing in a side that massively suits him. He's playing in a system that is
James as well on the other side.
Flourish. Yeah, really do. From a Liverpool perspective, I think 2021, Chris, is the year of the Trent. I think he just goes up to another level, and I think that we're sort of having. I think come next year, all being well, touch wood, in terms of trajectory and injuries and stuff, I think we're having the conversation of sort of Steven Gerrard levels of influence for the club.
It's an interesting one. I think he starts this season, Trent, a little bit different, and I'd be really interested in a bit of a deep dive, to be honest, in terms of, because it felt like he was pretty much becoming a bit of a central midfielder at right back. Now, he's been doing that a little bit anyway, but it felt like his game had matured. It wasn't, and I'm not just saying this game has been always about this, but it wasn't whipping balls into the box for a glancing header from Salah, Mane, Firmino. He's obviously a lot more than that anyway, but it felt like he was really involving himself in more central positions. I'd be really interested. I think it's sort of reversed back to the very high standards of 1920 Trent, to be honest, because I think that's the necessity. I'm interested to see what happens with Trent if Thiago comes in, because obviously Thiago is going to be somebody who the ball is going to go through a hell of a lot. He's going to be one of the chief creators. How do we sort of manage to marry that up with having these two fullbacks? I'm not saying that he'll necessarily take away any of Trent's creativity. I think, in fact, he might sort of add to it. We saw in the derby, for example, the amount of times Thiago was finding Trent out wide, and the amount of times he was finding Robertson on the other side as well. I feel it's going to be interesting to see how Trent develops in terms of, will he become a bit more rounded in terms of basically this guy who could. He won't play central midfield in the formation at the start of the game on Sky Sports, but essentially he is doing his job as a central midfielder, which he's sort of been doing already. Because if you look at how Liverpool line up, sometimes you pretty much might as well put Trent in centre mid and Henderson at right back.
Yeah.
That's the way it works a lot of the time anyway. Just really interested to see how he develops that almost midfield side of his game now. But it's going to be really, really exciting. I don't want him to start in central midfield, but I think we will sort of see a natural progression where he's picking up positions centrally a lot more. And I think that will lend to what you say there, Dan, about the comparisons with
Dan,
Gerrard.
Sorry, Chris.
No worries.
No, just while we're on the fullback discussion, but definitely right backs. The one that just popped in my head there I meant to mention earlier was Lamptey from Brighton. Another one who I think most of us have barely even heard of at the start of a year. He joined from Chelsea in January, I think, and barely even got in the team. I don't know if he was injured or just wasn't getting picked, but then post-project restart has been kind of a constant. And I think so far this season is a pretty strong case. He's kind of in the team of the year conversation, given kind of Trent's been kind of in and out with injury and stuff, and his form's not quite been at his best.
I'm not sure what you do with him unless you play a 5. That's my thing. Yeah. I'm not sure what you do. I think you're brave if you're picking him in a back 4. Is my thing. But yeah, I completely get the shout. He has been a revelation down there for Brighton.
I think on Curtis Jones, by the way, I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I'd have no problem Curtis Jones starting the Champions League final.
No, not at all.
Which is absolutely wild. And it's a very similar situation that we had when you think about it. Trent was the same age when he started the Champions League final against Real Madrid and Kiev. And to be at that level at the age of 19, where you would feel absolutely fine with him playing in a central midfield against Bayern Munich, is some place to be. I'd pick him over Naby Keita, for example. I feel like what we're getting with Curtis is, I think Klopp's been really clever. Everybody's expecting him to be this Steven Gerrard clone, essentially, of bursting through. And I do think he's got that to his game. I think he picks up spaces in the box really interestingly. I think he's almost got that. I can't believe I'm going to bring him up on a Liverpool.com podcast. He's got that Tim Cahill sort of quality of ghosting in and nobody quite knowing, which is really impressive because he's a big kid. You know what I mean? He's a really big lad compared to 5'2" Tim Cahill. But like everybody's sort of expecting this Steven Gerrard clone. I think he's turned them more into like a bit of a Wijnaldum, where he's and this isn't a negative. He's just grinding. He's just getting on the ball. He's popping it off. He's covering the ground. He's picking up spaces, in left, right, and I think I think everybody sort of thought he would be this lad who, after the Everton goal, rasping in 25, 30 yarders and sort of getting booked every game and being raw and ready and that kind of thing. I think he's actually a really mature, really good Wijnaldum understudy at the minute, and that's a really good place to be.
I think what gets forgotten about I spoke about him getting in because of the injuries, but it gets forgotten now. I think he's the first sub against Leeds on the opening day. I don't know if it was 2-2 at that point of the game or Liverpool needed a goal. But I remember just being a little bit surprised by that. Klopp had obviously seen enough since Project Restart and over pre-season, but it was a big call because I think Milner was on the bench that day. There were loads of other more senior options, and Curtis is his first change, and that's before the injuries kicked in. So the coaching staff has definitely seen something to think that he's taken a massive leap forward.
I always say what impresses me most about him is something that other people might think is a criticism, in that for a young lad, he doesn't bust the gut to try and impress. He's not absolutely blowing himself out in 60 minutes to try and show people that he's worthy of a Liverpool shirt. He does everything on his own terms over a football pitch. If you've got that, I think that's why Klopp loves him, because I think he loves his confidence and he loves his self-belief, and he thinks the rest we can just coach into him. He's got the ability, he's got the belief, the rest's easy. I think he'd much rather that than someone who isn't sure of themselves in a Liverpool shirt. And I think to have that at his age, I think it's going to get him incredibly far as a Liverpool player. Completely agree.
In terms of, I was just going to say a couple of Premier League players. I think Basuma is one to watch at Brighton. I think he's one to watch from a Liverpool perspective. I think if Liverpool will need to, funnily enough, we're talking about Jones there, he's 19, but Liverpool will need to not revamp the midfield, but they'll need to freshen it up at some point. Henderson's over 30. Wijnaldum is over 30 and probably leaving at the end of the season. Milner's 34, 35. Oxlade is 27, 28 going into it, I think, and he's obviously had a couple of big injuries. Maybe Keita's 25 now. I'm not saying that's old, and still there's a bit of uncertainty around them. They lost Lallana. I think Fabinho could end up being a centre-back. I think midfielders somewhere, and I think Basuma is a really interesting, progressive, modern midfielder. I think he carries the ball well. He gets up and down the pitch really well. I think he's got really good technique on the ball. I think from the little glimpses I've seen from Brighton this season, I think he's someone that really, really excites me. And the only other one that I've seen like little sorts of flashes of, and it might even be 2021, but the lad of Southampton, Gineppo, I think he could be something as well. I think he's a really interesting player. He plays out wide. He's under Hasenhüttl, so he'll start really kind of pressing from the front. I imagine he'll get that lockdown. I think he's one to keep an eye on. Because Walcott, for example, Stuart Armstrong, players like that, they're absolutely fine. But I think this lad, I think he's 20, and I think there's something about him.
All right, we'll leave it there. That's been the Liverpool.com podcast. Thank you very much to Kristian Walsh, to Joe Rabinowitz. And like we say, if you haven't already, check out Player of the Year and give it a vote. You can find links to it on the Daily Mirror, Liverpool.com, and Liverpool Echo platforms.
It's got its own URL, Dan.
Go on, Chris.
www.fansfootballeroftheyear.co.uk.
There you go. Go straight to it. Cut the middleman out. Thank you very much to the guys, and we'll see you again soon.